People who have had intimate encounters with an in-law or step-sibling, what was that like? Story 1. It's a long story, but I'll try to keep it brief. My wife and I are in our early to mid-30s and have been in an open relationship for about 2 years. She comes from a very conservative family, 3 kids and really successful, loving parents, which might be why she enjoys exploring. We all live in different countries from her parents, who are in their 60s. When we visit, we usually stay with them. We try to keep things discreet in our own city due to our careers, so we look for mingling opportunities when we travel, including when we visit her parents. We're careful not to get caught, until our second-to-last visit. We were on a SDC and, to our surprise, found a profile that unmistakably belonged to her parents. We hadn't even thought to look for older profiles, but it turns out they've been into it. My wife was shocked, but I've always had a thing for older women, and have told my wife about it, so I was excited. After some back and forth, my wife eventually talked to her mom about it. There were a lot of tears, but also some relief. Turns out they had done it in their 50s and kept the profile for her dad to browse. After a few awkward dinners where we didn't bring up the topic again, my wife and I had some private conversations about what had happened. I was upfront about the fact that I had a deep admiration for her mother, and my wife, being as understanding as she is, didn't seem uncomfortable with my feelings. She speaks to her mom regularly, and it turns out her mom had similar feelings toward me. While the idea of engaging in doing with her parents was off the table, my wife and I did consider the possibility of me spending time with her mom on our own. We've always did as couples and have never done separate activities, but given the high level of trust in our relationship, my wife and father-in-law agreed that it could be a one-time experience. During our next visit, we had an extremely awkward few days. We avoided the subject for a while, but then, after some drinks one evening, the topic came up and everyone was on board. It was agreed that I would spend time with her mom at a hotel instead. On that Friday night, my mother-in-law and I were picked up by an Uber and went to a 5-star hotel in the city, while my wife and father-in-law stayed behind. Our initial plan was to go out for dinner, but after checking in, things took a different turn, and we never made it to the restaurant. The experience itself was intense and emotional, one of the most passionate times I've ever had. The following day, we rejoined the family for dinner, and everything seemed normal. A few days later, we returned home, and it was as if nothing had changed, just a happy family. I love my wife deeply, and I've come to appreciate and care for my mother-in-law even more through this experience. While it was something I'll always remember, I'm content if it doesn't happen again. It was simply a unique experience that brought us closer together. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. We had a double date with benefits with my daughter and her husband. I feel like this is a place where I can tell this story. My 28-year-old daughter and her husband moved back to our area about 2 years ago and moved in with us to save money. We have a pretty good-sized home with a large basement suite, so for the most part, if we don't want to see each other, we don't have to. My wife and I have been swapsters for many years, and we never hid anything from our daughter. We created a very positive home regarding physical relations, and she knew of our recreational activities. She admitted to us around the time she started dating her now husband. They were also into swapping or mixing. They're both bisexual like my wife and me. Not long after they moved in, during a late night in the hot tub with a few drinks, I ended up clapping with my son-in-law while my wife and daughter watched. In the morning, we all discussed the experience and concluded that 1, it was hot AF, and 2, we're all consenting adults. A week or two later, once again in the hot tub after a few drinks, what began as a show once again of me doing it with my son-in-law ended up in a situation where everyone did it with everyone. The following morning, we again talked and again reached the conclusion we're consenting adults and our interests aren't necessarily because of some weird likings, although the taboo nature of it certainly leads in that way. Rather, we simply recognize we're all into groupie and it's convenient to be able to organize a 4-smoosh almost any time we want, particularly since it scratches the itch of a desire to do it with the same gender. So we've been doing this routinely and have included a couple of close friends for some limited experiences as well. My daughter does not have one-on-one time with either my wife or myself. Our arrangement is more of a 4 experience where we basically swap and play. Never in a million years did I think I would be doing stuff like this. It was very surreal the first time I was with my daughter. My wife even admitted she was a little weirded out by it at first. But we realized once we breached that taboo barrier, it wasn't that big of a deal. If any one of us is uncomfortable with this arrangement at any time, we'll stop. I do have to admit, in a list of the hottest things I've done in my life. Story 3. I had a fling with my male for 8 days. Last year, during the second wave of COVID, my wife, 28F, and I, 33M, were living in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment near a large city in the Northeast. We'd been married for 2 years, and things were going pretty well, honestly. Then one day she told me her single mother had lost her job due to layoffs and was struggling financially. She asked if her mom could stay with us for a while until she got back on her feet. Her mom, 48F, is a really sweet lady, and they had a decent relationship. I was hesitant at first, but I thought, what would I do if it were my mom? So her mom moved in. At first, it was great having her around. She cooked a lot, kept the house tidy, and spent time with us watching movies, but also giving us our space. I thought everything was going fine, but clearly, it wasn't. A few weeks turned into 3 months, and that's when things started to go downhill. My wife and mother-in-law began bickering a lot. We had stopped being intimate because my wife was always on edge and said she didn't feel comfortable with her mom in the house. Around this time, my wife started spending more time out with friends and working longer hours, or so I thought. It turns out, my wife was having an affair. How I found out was kind of crazy. A friend of mine saw them at a bar making out. He even sent me a real-time picture of them kissing, then getting into an Uber together. I was crushed. My mother-in-law came out to check on me, asking if everything was okay or if something had happened to Jenny. I told her Jenny was fine, but that I just needed some space. When Jenny finally got home, all hell broke loose. I hadn't planned on confronting her right away, but she insisted on knowing what was wrong when she saw I'd been crying. I couldn't keep it in anymore, so I showed her the picture. She went pale, started denying it, though it was clearly her, and the argument exploded right in front of her mom. Jenny blamed me, blamed her mom, blamed COVID. It was a mess. Mom took my side, and Jenny packed her bag, telling us both to go to hell. The next day, Jenny told me she was staying with a friend for a while to get some space. I didn't ask which friend, and that's exactly what she did. We exchanged a few texts, and she came by to grab some things a few days later, but it was just me and her mom in the house most of the time. One night, we were just sitting there watching a movie. I was sipping on some bourbon, and she had a glass of wine. I was opening up to her about how difficult things had been, and she reached over to pat my leg, but then she left her hand there. At that point, it had been over a month since I'd had any intimacy, and I'm guessing it had been longer for her too. And then, it just happened. I looked up at her, she leaned in, and, well, that was it. Let me tell you, Reddit, experience matters. I had never been with a woman so confident. She knew exactly what she wanted, and the chemistry was off the charts. Even though she was a bit older and not my usual type, it was incredible. We both talked about how guilty we felt afterward, but that didn't stop us from being all over each other for the next 8 days whenever I wasn't at work. Honestly, as messed up as it sounds, it was exactly the distraction I needed, something to look forward to. At first, we slept in separate beds, just in case, but eventually, I stayed in the extra bedroom with her twice. Looking back, it was definitely risky, but I was a mess and probably didn't care as much as I should have. So here's where it gets tough. You're probably not going to like this part. About 2 weeks later, Jenny calls. She wants to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. She admitted to everything. I, however, didn't. She apologized, cried, begged, and in the end, I agreed to see a marriage counselor. She said she wanted to come back home, and that's exactly what she did. Shortly after that, my mother-in-law moved out and went to live with a friend in Florida where she'd gotten a job offer that paid more than her previous one. Jenny and I tried to make things work, but deep down, I knew I just couldn't get past it. I still loved her, but I could never trust her again, and I knew I couldn't spend the next 50 years like that. It was just too much. So at the beginning of 2022, I filed for divorce, the hardest day of my life. Given all the texts and the picture I had, she agreed not to contest it, and now we're just waiting for the paperwork to be finalized. I moved in with a buddy who was happy to split the rent, and then just last week, my mother-in-law added me on Facebook. I'm not saying I'm heading to the beach anytime soon, but once all this is behind me, let's just say I'm definitely not ruling it out. Story 4. I did it with my husband's brother while his wife was giving birth. Just a heads up, my husband and I are in an open relationship, so there's no need to worry about any cheating here. A while ago, my brother-in-law, Vic, unexpectedly became a father. His wife was 7 months pregnant, so the baby arrived early, which took everyone by surprise. Carlos, my husband, called me to let me know what had happened. He was working and couldn't be there with his brother, and their parents were out of town. They immediately headed back, but still had a way to go, so Vic was alone. Since Carlos didn't want him to be at the hospital by himself, I offered to go keep him company while he finished up at work. He was totally on board with that, so I went. At the time, I didn't have any kids yet. When I got to the hospital, I went to the waiting area for deliveries, and there I saw Vic. He was sitting there looking a little pale. He seemed relieved when he saw me and apologized for making me come. But honestly, I didn't mind at all. I'm the type of person who loves being with family, both my own and my husband's, so he didn't need to apologize. I'm the kind of aunt who's always there for everyone, and loved by the whole family. Vic was clearly stressed. He and his wife hadn't gotten along well, so I figured that was why he was so tense. He opened up about how the baby was his wife's idea, and that he didn't want more kids. At the time, he already had 3, and he felt like that was more than enough. I totally understood where he was coming from. Kids can be a lot, and I have 2 myself. I can't imagine going for a 3rd. He kept complaining about a new baby and how his wife would now ignore him and all of that. His wife wasn't the greatest wife, and he wasn't the greatest husband either. They both had their issues, so it's a miracle that they had 3 kids, and the 3 of them turned out to be lovely people. I told him I'd go to the bathroom and to the vending machine to get something to eat. He looked nervous, so I smiled and gave him a kiss on the cheek. I got up, grabbed my purse and the bag I was carrying my clothes in, and went to the bathroom. I went in and didn't lock the door. There weren't many women in the halls that day. The ones that were there were either in labor or were nurses, and both had their own bathrooms, so I didn't worry. I left the clothes on the sink and started to remove my clothing. I looked in the mirror and I was completely bare. I wish I still had that body before the pregnancies, but that's long gone now. Just as I was about to take my inners off, I heard the door open, and when I turned to see who it was, I saw that it was Vic. I quickly grabbed a t-shirt and wrapped it around to cover, although it wasn't the first time he saw them. I asked him if my husband had already arrived, or if his wife already gave birth, but he was just staring at me without saying a word. I didn't understand why he was staring at me, but didn't say anything. It didn't take him long to give me an explanation as he turned around, bolted the door, and approached me. With a quick, strong movement, he yanked the shirt off. Without saying a single word, he kissed me. He wasn't affectionate. He was just charged and wanted to get rid of the tension accumulated from childbirth. What came after was a very wild and passionate banging. After we were done, I came out and saw that my husband had already arrived. We kissed and stayed the night together till the baby, a beautiful boy, arrived. Story 5. So I'm 34, and last night I ended up with my stepsister, who's 28. Let's call her SS1. Her mom married my dad during my senior year of high school. I joined the army right after graduating, so we never really grew up together or had much of a sibling relationship, just the occasional holiday interaction. We hadn't really spoken much over the years, but that changed at the beginning of December when we both attended a party for one of her sisters. We started chatting and eventually began texting pretty regularly. It turned out we had quite a bit in common, especially the fact that we're both divorced. She's been working on losing weight since having her last kid a few years ago, and I made a comment about how good she looked. Honestly, I meant it as more of a supportive "you're doing great" kind of compliment, but she took it as me checking her out. I clarified that it wasn't like that, I just noticed the difference. She replied with something like, "Well, I have eyes too." That sort of opened the door for things to get a bit more flirtatious. Nothing quite like flirty texting, but definitely not things you'd normally say to a sibling. Fast forward a couple weeks, it's now her other sister's birthday. We'll call her SS2. SS2 is the one I've actually always been closest with. Their mom has 4 kids in total, but she's the one I've bonded with over the years. So I joined SS1, SS2, and SS2's boyfriend for a day out to celebrate. We met up around lunchtime, grabbed something to eat, and spent the afternoon hitting up thrift stores and antique shops. I rode with SS1 while SS2 and her boyfriend took their own car. Later, we checked out this retro gaming place that had old arcade machines and consoles. It was a lot of fun, but as you probably know, playing arcade games together means standing pretty close. As the night went on, we kept getting closer, and honestly, it started to feel like a date. We were teasing each other whenever one of us lost, just a lot of playful back and forth. Eventually, we ended up at a pool hall to finish off the night. By then, our flirting must have been pretty obvious because the bartender actually commented on how we looked like a cute couple. That was a little awkward. We had to explain we were not a couple. SS2 and her boyfriend didn't seem to notice anything, though. They'd been drinking a lot more than we had and were starting to argue a bit, so they were distracted. So after the night wrapped up, we headed back to SS1's place since that's where I had parked. It was late and pretty cold out, so I told her I needed to come in and use the bathroom before heading home. I live about 45 minutes away. When I came out, we ended up standing near the door just talking for a while. It was obvious we were both feeling the same thing, but neither of us was ready to make the first move. The conversation got playful, teasing turned into a bit of light shoving back and forth, and eventually she lost her balance and fell back onto the couch, grabbing my arm and pulling me down with her. We stayed like that just a little too long. We started talking about how much trouble we'd be in if anyone in the family ever found out. Ironically, that just added to the tension. We both promised to keep it between us, and things escalated from there, right there on the couch. Now, I'm not totally sure how I feel about it. In some ways, it felt like one of the best first dates I've had. The connection, the passion, it all just flowed. I haven't been with anyone since my wife and I split up over a year and a half ago. I hadn't even been interested in dating, and I was never into one-night stands. But for something that technically should have felt wrong, it all felt strangely natural in the moment. Still, I can't shake this nagging sense of guilt. Like, if this ever gets out, it's gonna cause a mess. We're actually supposed to see each other again this afternoon, so I guess we'll find out how awkward it is in the daylight. I'm not even sure if I'm looking for advice here, it just feels better to get it off my chest. I'm curious though, has anyone else ever gone through something similar? Story 6. My stepbrother and I are both 20, and while we don't live in the same house, we went to the same high school and have been part of the same friend group for a while. I've always thought he was attractive, but figured that was off limits once my dad married his mom. Last night, a small group of us were hanging out at my best friend's house. Her parents are out of town on vacation, so we all got pretty drunk and ended up staying over. Her basement is basically like a fully finished apartment, living room, spare bedrooms, the works. So most of us crashed down there while she went upstairs to her room with her boyfriend. One of the guys with us passed out in one of the bedrooms, so his girlfriend stayed in there to keep an eye on him, which left just me and my stepbrother alone on the couch. This is where things started to get interesting. It was nearly 3 a.m., and we were both exhausted but still kind of drunk, the kind where you're too dizzy to fall asleep. We threw on a horror movie to try and chill out. A few minutes in, he got up to use the bathroom, and when he came back, he laid down on the couch with his head in my lap. At first, I figured he was just trying to get more comfortable for the movie. I mean, I've seen him lay like that on his mom before, so I didn't think too much of it. Like I said before, I've always found him attractive, so when he rested his head in my lap, I instantly felt a rush of butterflies and that strange, nervous flutter in my stomach. There was definitely a shift in the air, and I think he felt it too because everything escalated pretty quickly after that. He made an offhand comment about how much he liked my perfume, and then leaned in a little closer toward my neck. As we made eye contact, something unspoken passed between us. It was clear we were both thinking the same thing, and it went beyond just innocent affection. He pulled me gently, and we started kissing. It was intense, like all the unspoken tension between us had suddenly surfaced. It wasn't just about the moment, it felt like this buildup of curiosity, attraction, and maybe even longing that had been quietly growing over time. We couldn't seem to keep our hands off each other. Every touch felt electric, and every kiss was deeper than the last. It was like our bodies had been waiting for this, even if our minds were still catching up. There was this overwhelming energy, passion, connection, maybe even a bit of confusion, all tangled up in a way that felt too powerful to stop. Eventually, we moved to one of the spare rooms, still wrapped up in each other, and let the moment unfold privately. It was overwhelming in the best way, raw, emotional, and incredibly intimate. For me, it wasn't just physical. It felt like a spark that lit something much deeper. Ever since, I can't stop replaying it in my head. I don't know what this means yet, but I think I'm feeling something real. Maybe it's messy, maybe it's complicated. But part of me wonders if I might actually be falling for him. TLDR. Got drunk at my friend's house and stayed the night. Had the best time of my life with my stepbrother in her basement. Story 7. The best I've ever had was with my brother-in-law. So I go to my sister's house pretty often, usually once a week or so. It's a chill vibe. We hang out, there's always snacks, and we usually share a bit of weed before watching a movie or something. Once the movie's over, I usually crash on the couch. Sometimes I can hear them being intimate in their room, which has always made things a little awkward for me. Anyway, this time after they went to bed, I restarted the movie and got up to grab some ice cream from the freezer, which is kind of near their room. While I was doing that, her boyfriend came back out. I was wearing one of his oversized shirts and some comfy sleep shorts. As he passed me, there was a bit of accidental contact. Nothing major, but it definitely caught me off guard. He sat down on the couch again and I went back to my ice cream. It was one of those pre-made cones and yeah, I guess I do eat them kinda weird, lol. He kept glancing over, then back at the TV, and I noticed he looked like he was getting a little uncomfortable, fidgeting and eventually putting a throw pillow in his lap. After a while, he asked if I wanted to smoke again. I didn't think much of it and just scooted closer so we could pass the bong more easily. We both got pretty baked and ended up watching TikToks together. I had my head on his chest at one point and he had his arm around me. It felt oddly natural in the moment. Then he blew a little smoke playfully in my face and for some reason, I kissed him. It surprised both of us. He hesitated for a second, then kissed me back. Things got really intense after we started kissing. What followed was incredible. He knew exactly how to take his time, how to read my body, and honestly, I completely lost track of how many times I saw the fireworks. Afterward, he cleaned up and just sat there with me, letting my head rest on his lap until I fell asleep. When I woke up, he was back in bed with my sister like nothing had ever happened. Now, we both just go on like it never happened, but every now and then I'll catch him looking at me in a way that tells me it's still on his mind. And honestly, it kinda lingers on mine too. Story 8. I sat sleeping with my boyfriend's sister-in-law. Let me start by saying that I truly love my boyfriend Mike. We've been together for a few years, have kids in the mix, and share a relationship that's built on love, understanding, and mutual support. Like any couple, we've had our ups and downs, but we've always worked through them together. Mike's brother Stan is a solid guy. He's a great provider for his family and, honestly, a really good friend. Mike enjoys spending time with his brothers, but for a long time, those hangouts were pretty low-key because of Stan's wife, Stella. Stella was raised in a very strict Christian household. Her dad's a pastor, so for most of her life, clubs, smoking, and even casual drinking were totally off limits. Lately, though, she's been slowly stepping out of her shell, and it's been great to see her becoming more comfortable just being herself. Once Mike and I became more settled as a couple, we started hosting regular family gatherings. Everyone comes together at our place, shares good food, laughs, and quality time. At the end of the night, we split up, guys head over to Mike's place to hang out, watch sports, and unwind, while the girls come back with me for some cozy spa nights and catch-ups. This little tradition has been going on for a couple of years now, and it's become such a regular thing that Stella and I actually coordinate directly to plan our girls' weekends. Since none of the other brothers are in serious relationships, it's usually just the two of us, and it works perfectly. Whenever we're feeling overwhelmed or just need a change of pace, spontaneous family visit always does the trick, and the guys never mind an excuse to see everyone. It's become one of the things I look forward to most when life gets hectic. Stella and Stan started facing some issues in their marriage and decided to open it up, while Mike and I went through our own rough patch and ended up breaking up, living in that awkward limbo stage that so many couples go through. We decided to have a girls' night to bring everyone together and reestablish our connection with our families. I've been in this relationship for a while, and I was committed to working through things just like Stella was with hers. One weekend, we all had an amazing time together, and as the night came to an end, Stella and I were ready to unwind with a couple bottles of wine and a clay facial mask. As with any girl time, we let loose and had a heart-to-heart talking about everything, venting and laughing. We even joked about those little annoyances that everyone knows, like how it feels when your partner's breath is in your face while you're trying to sleep. That night was no different. We shared how things were going with the guys and how intimacy had become a struggle. Stella admitted she opened her relationship because there was no emotional connection anymore. I remember saying that adding another person into the mix didn't necessarily solve underlying issues. She agreed, though it felt more like a reluctant acknowledgement. Then she asked about us, and I told her how our intimacy had faded too. I joked about how our relationship had become more about the physical side with little emotional connection. We both laughed a little, half sad, half hoping for more. I found myself reminiscing about the days when it was easier to get lost in a passionate kiss and how the intimacy with other women felt so different. We fantasized about a perfect world where we could have that soft connection we missed while still maintaining our families that we loved. We clinked glasses, washed off our masks, and settled in to watch a new show, Firefly Lane. As we climbed into bed, something shifted in the air. Stella looked so good in my PJs, her face flushed from the wine, a genuine smile on her face. I'd always liked her smile. She'd always seemed a little sad. And that night I made sure to tell her that. Stan is a great guy, but it was clear he didn't truly love Stella, and we all knew it. He got her pregnant when she was 19, and her father insisted they marry. Stella has always lived for others. It's just the way she is. As for me, I'm a little more loud and spontaneous, but I too live for my family. Even so, I always made sure to remind Stella how beautiful, strong, and powerful she is. I even had her saved as a goddess in my phone. One night, after a few episodes of our show, we realized we were low on wine. As we headed to the kitchen, we decided some music was in order, and we put on some 90s R&B. We started dancing, laughing, and enjoying the music, and before we knew it, we were back in my room, drunk and happy, ready to watch more of the show. As we settled in, Stella started talking about how she wanted to lose a few things here and there. I rolled my eyes and pulled her into my arms, looking up at her. I told her she was perfect the way she was, and anyone would be lucky to have her. We shared a quiet giggle, then turned our attention back to the show, only to notice a character falling through a glass table. At that moment, Stella came closer to me, her body pressing into mine, and she opened my legs to make space for herself. I thought nothing of it as I wrapped my arms tighter around her and looked up. She gently grabbed my face and we kissed. It was a kiss that felt like an awakening, intense, tender, and everything I had missed for so long. We pulled away, laughing it off like it was just a joke, but then I couldn't help myself. I kissed her again, this time deeper, more urgent, as we let everything else fall away. What followed was something raw and beautiful, a connection we hadn't expected but couldn't deny. We spent the rest of the night talking and laughing, enjoying each other's company in the most carefree way. It was unlike anything I'd felt in years. When morning came, we lay together, the sun warming us as we cuddled on the floor, talking about everything and nothing. It was special, something intimate and ours, something we both knew had the potential to disrupt everything we had built. We agreed that the guys could never know. We wanted to live in this bubble just for a little while longer and savor what we had. Later that day, we went out for dinner with everyone. The boys couldn't help but notice how different we looked, how happy and radiant we seemed. Stella and I shared a glance, a quiet laugh as we enjoyed the evening. As we said our goodbyes, Stella slipped a kiss on my neck, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was over in an instant, but it left me breathless. She smiled that beautiful smile, the one I had grown so fond of, and walked away. I returned to Mike's side, holding his hand as we waved them off. It's been some time since that first girls' night, and I'm happy to say that both Stella and I have worked through a lot. But we're both excited for the next girls' weekend and our favorite show to return. Edit. Stella and Stan's marriage was open at the time. Mike and I were not together. Story 9. I banged on my daughter-in-law. It was the best I've ever had in my life. I recognize that I've made a mistake, and I deeply regret the way I've behaved. I've betrayed my son, and I know that. However, I struggled with powerful feelings that I couldn't control. These emotions had been building inside me ever since I met her, and when the opportunity arose, I acted impulsively. Right now, I feel a mixture of guilt and an intense sense of relief, but I realize the consequences of my actions. To provide some context, my son is my only child. I've been divorced for a while now and haven't been in a romantic relationship since my ex-wife left. My son and his wife don't have children, and they live separately. When I first met her, I was taken aback by how captivating she was. She told me she was a model, and I understood why she was so successful. I couldn't help but notice her beauty and confidence. I started developing feelings for her from the moment we met. It felt like there was some mutual interest too. Small gestures like the kiss on the cheek when my son wasn't looking, or the way she laughed at my jokes made me think that maybe she felt the same way. But for a long time I tried to resist those feelings because I knew how much I loved my son. Well, last week, I finally did it with her. I caved in. My son was out at work. She was telling me that he doesn't have time for her, that she was feeling lonely. I confided in her that I've wanted to bang her since the first time I laid eyes on her, that she was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Well, one thing led to another, and we ended up doing it for hours that day, in every room of the house. It was the hottest thing I've ever experienced in my life, and was hers, she said. We agreed to never do it again, to just get it off our chests, but since then I can tell she wants more. I don't regret it. I'm so happy to have finally had my dream come true. Story 10. I did it with my sister-in-law's son to prove a point. Let me start by saying that I love my sister-in-law, and I absolutely don't hate her or her family. I mean, I married her brother, so it's clear I get along with her family. My husband and I have been married for 22 years now. We were both 21 when we got married, and we have 2 kids, a daughter and a son. Our daughter is our oldest, born a year after we got married, and our son is 13. My husband's sister Stephanie has 2 sons, but sometimes she feels the need to comment on how we raised our daughter, specifically her behavior. Our daughter has had a lot of boyfriends, and it seems like she's always bringing someone new to family gatherings. Apparently, this doesn't sit well with Stephanie, who often tells me that it seems like my daughter is just being passed around. She usually says it in a joking way, but it's passive-aggressive, and it really bothers me. Especially when I know her sons aren't exactly perfect angels, especially her youngest. I've caught him rummaging through my inners, and I'm aware he's been stealing some of my clothes. I've tried to ignore it and never brought it up to Stephanie, but now I'm determined to show that her son isn't perfect either. I started by casually asking him about his relationships with girls, trying to see if there's anything he's done that he hasn't shared with his mom. I guess I wasn't being straightforward enough because he never caught on as to why I was asking, but that's when I realized maybe I could be the reason. If I do it with her son, that will ultimately prove that he isn't the perfect boy that she brags about. Right now, he's at home, and Stephanie and her husband went out for a little date night, so I decided to pay him a visit. He wasn't expecting me, of course, but I told him that his parents asked me to stop by. He was a bit confused about it since he's clearly old enough to take care of himself. Then I turned on my flirtatious side, and it seemed to be working because he matched my energy. Eventually, we ended up in his bedroom, and I had him exactly where I wanted him. He confirmed my point over the next 30 minutes. And if I'm being honest, I enjoyed it way more than I thought, but I left knowing that any time my sister-in-law tries to say something about how I raised my daughter in the back of my head, I will always know what really happened. Story 11. I made a huge mistake with my son-in-law and can't say anything. This has been weighing on me for a while, and I feel like I need to get it off my chest. I know it was a huge lapse in judgment, and I've felt terrible ever since. I'm divorced from my husband of 36 years. Our divorce was finalized in November of 2018, and not long after, he started dating someone who's about 15 years younger than me. After the divorce, I spiraled into a deep depression and lost all my self-confidence, but I decided to use that as motivation. I got into better shape, lost 20 pounds, and ultimately decided to get breast implants, which I did last June. Afterward, I pretty much kept to myself for a month to recover and regain my confidence before I was ready to go out again. My daughter and son-in-law have a pool in their backyard, so I spent some time there with them and my grandkids over the summer. In late July, my son-in-law made a comment about my jugs. I was mortified, even though I knew it was obvious. I'd been swimming with them for years and there was no real way to hide it. Later that night, he sent me a text apologizing for what he had said and told me he was happy for me. I texted back and eventually I sent him an explicit selfie. He was very supportive, complimenting me and telling me I looked amazing. I was in a really low place and had been drinking. I asked him if he wanted to come over and he did, and we ended up banging. It had been about 3 years since I'd been intimate with anyone, and I think just the attention and being told I was beautiful led me to do it. Since then, I've sent him a few pictures when he asked, but we haven't done anything further. We've talked about it since and both agree it was a huge mistake. We promised each other we wouldn't tell my daughter. I haven't told anyone about this and I feel incredibly guilty. I can't stand that I'm keeping such a big secret from my daughter, but I just can't bring myself to tell her. Thanks for listening. Story 12. This is something I've never shared with anyone before. It's one of those memories that still makes me cringe when I think about it. Years ago, I had a one-time encounter with my mother-in-law, and to this day I can't fully explain how it happened or what led us there. At the time, my wife and I were separated, and in the process of divorcing, things between us were tense. to say the least, and I was carrying a lot of emotional baggage. One day, my mother-in-law asked if I could come over to help her move some furniture. She was always kind to me, and despite the impending divorce, we had maintained a cordial relationship. I figured helping her out would be a good distraction and a chance to keep things amicable. After we finished the heavy lifting, she invited me to sit down for a drink. It seemed harmless enough, so we made some cocktails and started talking. Inevitably, the conversation turned to my separation from her daughter. She was sympathetic but also surprisingly candid. We ended up sharing personal frustrations and feelings about the situation. Looking back, I realize how vulnerable we both were, me dealing with the fallout of my marriage and her likely feeling lonely and possibly even unappreciated. Fast forward to midnight, and the drinks were flowing freely. By then, we'd each had about 6 cocktails, and the atmosphere had shifted in a way I couldn't quite put my finger on at the time. Suddenly, I found myself looking at her with her jeans down around her ankles, bent over the kitchen table. To this day, I honestly don't know who made the first move or how things escalated so quickly. It was a whirlwind moment, completely unexpected, and undeniably reckless. The next morning, reality hit like a ton of bricks. She called me later that day and brushed off the entire thing by saying, "I had so much to drink last night, I don't even remember anything." I could tell it was her way of pretending it never happened. And honestly, I was more than okay with that. It was easier for both of us to just sweep it under the rug and move on as if nothing had occurred. Afterward, I saw her several times in casual settings, family gatherings, holiday events, and the like. We never acknowledged what had happened or acted awkward around each other. Somehow, we managed to compartmentalize it completely and maintain a normal dynamic. It was like we had an unspoken agreement to bury the memory and leave it in the past. At the time, I was about 30 years old, and she was around 50. The age gap only added to the surreal nature of the whole experience. While I don't carry any lingering feelings for her, the memory still leaves me with a mix of discomfort and disbelief whenever it crosses my mind. I've never told anyone about that night until now, and I don't plan to. It's a chapter of my life I prefer to keep closed, though every now and then it resurfaces in my thoughts. Story 13. I'm the product of a very unusual family situation, but the story is more complex than it first appears. You know how everyone has 2 sets of grandparents, your father's parents and your mother's parents? Well, both sets of my grandparents divorced when my parents were young children. Then my paternal grandfather married my maternal grandmother. This happened about a decade or more before I was born. My paternal grandfather legally adopted my mother when she was about 9 years old. Meanwhile, my father was raised by his mother in a separate household. My parents knew about each other but weren't raised together. They met when they were in their late teens, got pregnant, married, divorced a few months later, and then I was born. By the time I was born, my mom was already married to her second husband, which is another complicated story. By the time I was 2, I was adopted by my grandparents, the ones who were previously married to each other. They never had children together, but they had children from their previous marriages. This makes me somewhat of a second-generation son in a way. The situation has some odd effects. I'm related to both sides of the family by blood. Most people can trace their lineage to just one set of grandparents, but I can trace mine to both sides. Since my mother was adopted by my paternal grandfather, my parents were legal siblings, and since I was adopted by my grandparents, it technically makes me a legal sibling to my own parents. I even became my own uncle. It's a very unique situation, but it doesn't affect my relationships with anyone in a negative way. I didn't grow up with my biological parents, but they are wonderful grandparents to my children. My adopted parents have since passed away, and growing up with Depression-era grandparents made for a different childhood experience. Add to that the fact that I lived on a boat for a few years. Another long story. Over the years, I've had a few conversations with my parents about how it all unfolded. Apparently, it caused a lot of confusion in the family at first, but in the end, everything worked out. I'm healthy, doing well, and I'm grateful to have such a strong and loving family. One funny result of all this is that at my wedding, the seating chart was nearly impossible to organize because I had 3 mothers and 6 fathers, my biological mom, my stepmom, my adopted mom, my father, my adopted father, and 4 stepfathers. As I grew up, I tended to relate more like a sibling to my biological parents than a traditional parent-child relationship. But after the passing of my adopted parents, it felt more natural for my relationship with my biological parents to evolve into something closer to a grandparent dynamic. It just makes more sense, and it's easier for my kids to understand their grandparents' role since that's what they are by blood. Edit. I was raised as an only child, though I have several half-siblings. I was raised by my grandparents, and my half-siblings were raised by their birth parents. I'm the youngest in my adopted generation, but the oldest in my bloodline. And because of the multiple marriages within my parents' generation, some of my half-siblings aren't related to each other at all. So I'm both the youngest and the oldest in different ways, depending on how you look at it. People often ask me what it's like to have such an unusual family background, but honestly, I don't know any other way. I've never known anything different until I started making my own family. In a way, I like to think I was wanted and loved by so many people that they all had to share me. Story 14. My brother and stepsister had a brief romantic relationship in the past. Both of them are now happily married to other people, have children, and maintain a completely normal and respectful relationship with each other. There's absolutely no lingering awkwardness or tension between them about what happened. The unusual part of the story is how our parents, my dad and stepmom, reacted back then. They weren't just supportive. They actively encouraged my brother and stepsister to be together. It wasn't just casual approval either. There was a point where they openly hoped the two of them would pursue a serious relationship and even get married one day. Over time, things naturally went in different directions for my brother and stepsister. They both found their own partners, built families, and moved on. The chapter of their lives when they were romantically involved feels like a distant memory to them, but not so much for my stepmom. Every now and then when my stepmom has had a few drinks, she'll bring it up. She sometimes reminisces about how she once thought my brother and stepsister would end up together. It's like part of her still wishes things had worked out that way, even though it's clear they're both happy with how their lives turned out. It's one of those family stories that feels a little strange looking back on, especially because of how involved my dad and stepmom were in trying to make it happen. But as far as my brother and stepsister are concerned, it's ancient history. They're just focused on their own lives and families now. Story 15. After my parents went through a messy divorce, my dad eventually started dating again. For a few months, he was pretty secretive about his new relationship, only dropping vague hints about who he was seeing. Then one day he decided it was time for me to meet his girlfriend and her family. To mark the occasion, we all went to a relative's country house for a weekend gathering. It was a lively event with plenty of food, laughter, and wine flowing throughout the night. As the evening wore on, the group gradually dwindled, and by the end it was just me and my dad's girlfriend's daughter left awake. We'd been getting along really well all evening, chatting and joking like old friends despite having just met. By that point, we were both fairly tipsy, which probably added to how easily we connected. When I decided to call it a night, I stood up to say goodnight and gave her a quick goodnight kiss. What started as an innocent gesture quickly escalated, and before I knew it, one thing led to another. For the next few months, we continued seeing each other in secret. I'm not sure if my dad ever figured out why I was suddenly so eager to visit his girlfriend's place, but I didn't hesitate for a second whenever the invitation was extended. Fast forward 6 or 7 years and my dad eventually married his girlfriend. I stood proudly as a groomsman at their wedding, fully aware of the unique history I shared with my new stepsister. By then, everything between us had long since fizzled out and we had moved on to build our own separate lives. What remained was a genuine friendship, and we still get along really well to this day. Sometimes, in moments of humor, I bring up the story in games of Never Have I Ever, casually dropping, "I've never hooked up with my sister." It always gets a laugh, though I make sure to clarify the context for anyone who doesn't know the full story. Looking back, I have no regrets about what happened. We were teenagers, navigating life as best we could in the middle of complicated family dynamics. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.